Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
Did you know there is no dark side of the moon, really?
Really?
As a matter of fact, it's all dark.
Well, I'll be doggone.
Hey, well, welcome to Two Guys Talking About Records, a vinyl community podcast. Episode 2. We made it, and the cane didn't come out and yank either of us off stage.
What a surprise. It's a miracle. We're doing it again.
Yeah, always fun to do. My name's Jim Gleason. I'm a record store owner, and this?
Steve Carlson, and I just have a YouTube channel.
You're a record collector, but we're both record collectors, actually.
That's true. Yes, we are.
Which is kind of neat. So I've been doing this a long time. Not the record store thing, just the record collecting thing.
Same here. 50 some years now, record collecting.
Ouch. But it's fun. And we talked about that last week, and that's why we're doing this. If you are just new to this podcast, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome. Stick with us because as we talk about records, because this is Two Guys Talking About Records, we hope to maybe entertain and possibly even educate a little bit along the way.
Yeah, okay.
That's a big task coming from me as well. So yes. That is always fun to say, but I don't know how we're going to accomplish that. But at the very least, we'll entertain.
Yes, we will. I'll just mispronounce everything, so yeah, it should be good.
So this week marked the 50th anniversary of the release of Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. Now, I want to get to this and talk with you a little bit about it coming up, but as this is a vinyl community podcast, and the vinyl community is all about talking about what records they're bringing in, I thought we'd start off and say, what were some of your new pickups in the past week, the things that you're really excited about that you brought into your collection?
As usual, I brought in too much. Just feel free to ask my wife, and she will tell you that. But I did get an original Violent Femmes. Excellent. I used to have that. It was great to have that thing back. Tripping Daisy, thanks to Jim, I brought that in. A Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon album.
The Wembley
concert.
But the bootleg.
Yes, a bootleg. Fancy bootleg, though. Aren't those nice now? Wow.
Yeah, they're doing pretty good.
And, yeah, other stuff. Those are kind of some of the main things I brought.
I managed to bring a few goodies back into the collection. I think I talked last week about how when we opened the store, I let go of a few things. And like many other collectors, I let go of things from time to time because you're thinking about it. Do I really listen to this? Yeah. And then once it's gone, you say, I shouldn't have gotten rid of that. But I found a copy of the Dream Academy, the self-titled Dream Academy, a good, nice looking pressing from 1985. Known pretty much for the one song, but I lived in the UP for a long time, so that Life in a Northern Town it's a fun one.
That's a great song. I mean, I love that song. That's nice.
The other thing that I was really excited about, they just reissued the Cult's Love. The original, I forget when that was, 83, 84, somewhere in there. But they just reissued this on red vinyl, coming from the Beggars Archive series off of Beggars Banquet. And it sounds really good. I had that album way back when the original, when that was originally, 1985 was when that was originally released. Okay. A lot of great stuff on there, and I had kind of sufficed in my collection with a Cult's Greatest Hits. So
yes.
I'll be letting that one go, but happy to get Love back in the collection this time around. Then the only other thing of note that I picked up in the past week, and I say picked up, I mean came into the store and I kind of weeded that into the personal collection. And I've not listened to this yet, and I'm very excited too. It's a copy of Yusuf Lateef's Detroit, latitude 42, 30 minutes. Longitude 83. I forget how they go in there, but it's his album about Detroit and the just the locations around Detroit. So,
well, that makes sense, especially with a big Michigan record collection. Fascinating. Yep. I didn't know they did that. Wow.
That originally came out by the looks in 1969, and it's got songs in there called Bishop School, Eastern Market, Belle Isle, Woodward Avenue, Lucky Old Son, and it's going to be jazz funk. So I haven't listened yet. I got to get it cleaned up, and
we should do a road trip to Detroit with that and follow where he's going and see if we come out alive.
That sounds like a great YouTube channel on it in and of itself.
Yes, following the steps of Yusuf.
Well, that's cool. So every week, we'll chat a little bit about what you pick up and what I decide to keep, and maybe what you find here that you can't live without that I tease you with.
Yes, a lot.
So, as we mentioned early on, that this week marked the 50th anniversary of the release of Dark Side of the Moon. And I thought that'd be a good conversation piece to have, because this is it's just such a monumental album. Yeah. It's such an important album, not only to fans of Pink Floyd, fans of music, but I think just generally speaking, society has really kind of melded around this culturally as well.
Yep. Does it make it an antique then?
At 50 years, I think it does, wow. But only if you've got that original version.
Okay, all right, very good. It is. You know, I think, to me, most record collectors can remember the first time they listened to Dark Side of the Moon. There's not a lot of albums out there in life, I think, that you remember, and especially if 70s, if you're from the 70s, because it was such a change of pace. My older brother, he came back from college. It was the 75, and he goes, "Man, I heard this great music. You need to go buy Dark Side of the Moon." Now, an older brother could have went and bought the album for me. Hey, son, hey, brother, I bought you this album. But no, my brother Bob's really cheap. You need to go buy this and hear this. So I went and I bought it. And I mean, I was so blown away just how the music went from speaker to speaker. I'd never heard that. I've been listening to 70s AM. And then this comes around. And then when he didn't tell me about the alarm clocks going off, the tick, tick, tick. He goes, "Oh, crank that up so you can hear that, those tick, tick, tick." Oh, okay, sure. And man, when those alarms went off, I jumped out of my skin. It was like, wow.
Blow your speakers out.
Yeah, amazing.
I think I came in around the backside of Dark Side of the Moon. My first foray into Pink Floyd would have been in my mid-high school years with The Wall.
Oh,
and
sure.
And hearing that and really kind of getting into that. So from The Wall, I began backtracking and then discovered more Floyd after that, and Dark Side of the Moon was amongst that. Now, I'm going to make an admission here, and I don't want to tick off anybody that's listening. I love Dark Side of the Moon. I want to say that. I think it's a fantastic album. I will dive to that often in my collection to listen to, but it's not really my favorite Pink Floyd album. So
yeah, go on.
I have a different affinity for animals.
People are just clicking off right now, but feel free to talk. We just lost half the.
No. Well, you see what I mean, though. I have more of an affinity to animals. There's an emotional connection to that album. Not to say that Dark Side isn't a great album. I love it. Like I said, it's just that if I rank my Pink Floyd albums, when you do that, too, you also have to break it up. Okay, now, do I mean early Floyd? Mm-hmm. Do I mean mid Floyd, which is Dark Side of the Moon, Animals, and The Wall? Or do I mean late Floyd, where Waters and Gilmour had their little tiff?
With me, as time has gone, it was always Dark Side, but probably the last 5-10 years, Wish You Were Here took over my top spot for my favorite Floyd album. But the one still that had the most impact by far is Dark Side of the Moon over any other album.
You think about this too. It's been in the news every couple of years. They pop up that story saying that it has been in the charts for X amount of time, and it has been a part of the best sellers for X amount of time.
963 weeks.
Yeah.
45 million copies. Wow. You would think that should be, cost only $1 that much. They say that 1 out of 14 people in the world own Dark Side of the Moon. Now, that's probably because some people, like one I'm looking at, has a stack of Dark Side of the Moon, so that kind of throws it off, but there's that many out there.
And this is still, speaking from the record store guy side of things, I could sell a copy of that a week. We get very close to that, and I'm always ordering it. Folks come in who are replacing collections. Folks come in who are starting collections, younger, older. Dark Side of the Moon is always a go-to for them when they get that. Yeah. That's one that, so many different record channels will say this is one of the albums, one of the 20 that you must have, or it's one of those desert island albums that you must have.
It is. And it's an album where it's not about one copy. In my previous collection, I probably had 4 copies. You had an original with all the stickers and posters. I had bought that from you. They don't last in a flood. But I had other pressings of it. Now, as I've been rebuilding, I have the MoFi. So if you're going to go big, right?
Yep.
So I have that MoFi, and I hope to originally get an original with all the goodies in there. That's kind of on that want list. But
Get back to that.
yeah, it's just in CD form. Then, of course, you buy in CD. Then, of course, they go, well, this is even a better CD. So, okay. And you go and you buy even the better CD. And, I don't know, a billion box sets later, here you are.
Well, I called this up on Discogs, and we're going to be talking a lot about Discogs through the course of this podcast as well. This is really a go-to site for a lot of collectors. But on the MR, which is the master release page for Dark Side of the Moon on Discogs, they've got some interesting information on here. You mentioned that the early releases included 2 posters and the 2 colored stickers inside the gatefold sleeve. But Discogs adds that on September 11th of 2020, so just a couple of years ago, the MR, the master release for Dark Side of the Moon, reached the threshold of 1,000 different versions, and is currently hovering around that number, making it one of the most populated master releases in the entire Discogs database. That means users submitted, there are over 1,000 different versions of Dark Side of the Moon floating out there. They go on to say that most of the vinyl versions were issued with gatefold sleeves. However, there are a number of versions that have some significant differences in them, mostly from overseas versions of that as well. But new and previously undocumented versions of Dark Side of the Moon get added to the database of Discogs very frequently, making it one of the most interesting titles to focus on for what they call deep collectors.
Wow. And so if you buy a Dark Side of the Moon, you're going to put it into Discogs, brew a cup of coffee, brew a pot of coffee, because you're going to be there a while trying to find it in there. I mean, it is incredible what you got to do to dig through to find it.
You know, and for folks
But it's worth it.
that aren't familiar with what we're talking about when you do that deep dive, and I do have, and this is going to work great for audio, but I'm calling up my, I'm hauling out my original copy.
Wow.
That has the posters and stuff.
Yep.
But if you begin looking and you want to do that deep dive,
Is that for sale?
not yet.
Oh, damn it.
Oh, no, this is personal. But you do the deep dive and you start looking into the dead wax runouts on these. That's where you get into this, how there can be 1,000 different versions. So anybody that has this, if you really, really are a power user of Discogs and you dig in to see, okay, that this is has got the Wally stamp on there for the lathe cut, or the F16, the F16 run out, so you can ID this as a specific pressing. That's how you get to that 1,000 number with the different stampings on there coming from Columbia in this case. Or this one is a Harvest, I'm sorry.
I'd heard the very first ones too. The triangle there that's right in the middle, it was solid blue.
Correct, and those are UK. I looked that up as well. That is, it's a solid blue triangle instead of the see-through with the track listings in there. And some of those UK ones, I just looked this up earlier, they can go for as high as $2,000 for that first pressing UK with the solid triangle in the center.
So you can get a used car or an original UK. You got to make decisions in life.
And the pressings. But
Yes.
the whole idea of this being repressed multiple times, though, too, I think I'd have to go back and look and see how many remixes it's undergone. But the major remix was a few years back for that very, the one that's most commonly available now as a new piece of vinyl is the remix. Was done in 2011, I believe, and that was a remix, according to the hype sticker, by James Guthrie, Joel Plant, and Bernie Grundman. So some high, big names doing that remix. And I have listened to that remix a couple times, and it sounds great. I don't know as if I could discern a difference between the original mix and that one, but I'm sure some people can.
You wonder how long those master tapes last. How many times can you redo these, without them eventually losing?
You go back to the well, and the master tapes are going to be magnetic in nature, so they will degrade over time regardless. So I'm sure that there's some very, very high-end digital backups
no
made
doubt.
of those, and then, well, we won't get into the whole MoFi thing, whether or not
whether
or not they're going to pick up
jump into
on it.
that pool.
But I know that I also have and like you, I've got a MoFi version of that, the original master recording.
Yeah.
Whether or not that is true analog, I think back then they were doing true.
Yes, no doubt.
They were doing the true analog, but that's always a good one to have. And if you do get a good, and I'm talking a clean original master version of that, you can tell a difference in the sound.
Okay.
It sounds phenomenal.
I was just listening to that today before I came in. And it's just, you just sit back. And this is one of those where I guess you could turn the lights down, put headphones on. It's very much a headphone album.
I will agree.
Yes. And the whole Wizard of Oz thing, did you ever do that? Did you ever play it to, there's no way I was going to sit there and do that, but you have?
I have. In fact, I have not only done that, but I have cut together a lengthy video. Remember, I used to teach.
Yes.
I was a college professor at one point in my life, and I cut together a great big lecture and a full cut of the movie that wove Dark Side of the Moon in and out with the dialogue and the music of the movie. And, Roger Waters and others have come on lately, very, very recently, and debunked the whole notion that there is some sort of connectivity between the two, that they didn't have that in mind when they recorded it. And that's all well and good. Coincidences happen, but it's still fun to think about. And yes, I will admit it does sync up rather nicely early on in the film throughout.
Sure.
By the way, I have tried uploading that to YouTube a couple times for the Radio Wasteland channel, and it gets tagged for copyright and blocked, not because of Pink Floyd or the music, but because of the Wizard of Oz.
Oz, of course.
So,
all right.
And I don't know how some of these exist on YouTube because they're out there and you can see them, but I think I did a much better job weaving everything together. That's just me.
Yeah. What I always liked about this Pink Floyd is it was just Pink Floyd was changing course. Sid Barrett was now gone. They're trying to figure out, what are we going to do? And you can hear it in metal, in echoes. When you put on that Echoes, that album beforehand, it's there. And so it was always interesting. So Pink Floyd goes, okay, our next album, well, let's work on this as we tour. And they began writing it as they were touring and put it in as part of the metal concert. So it wasn't written and said, we're going to the studio and do this first. It was all done on tour. By the time they hit the studio, it didn't take them long. They said like a couple weeks, and they were able to knock it out because they had been working it and changing it. But they finally found what they wanted to do. And, Waters says, I want to say something. I don't want cryptic lyrics. I want it to be easily understood. This is about anxiety. This is about, our life on the road, kind of our anxieties. For instance, the airplane crash, Richard Wright was scared of flying. So let's crash an airplane just for him on that. Time about, we only have so much time. So, there interesting concept put into this, but it was ready to go through all those concerts.
And earlier I mentioned that if you think about Pink Floyd as a group, they have these three stages, the three main stages. The early Floyd, which even after Barrett's departure was still, I think, heavily influenced by him.
Yes.
You get into Metal and Obscured by Clouds that still has that experimentative feel that was Barrett's hallmark. And I think they were still trying to stay true to his vision when they finally decided, let's make this jump into and evolve, if you will, into this mid-range Floyd.
Gilmour has gone on to saying he didn't want to do this psychedelic noodling anymore. He was just tired of that. And, he brought out the Searing guitars on that album. His guitar solos are on Time and Money, incredible, beautiful.
There's lots of other information on the production of this album. In fact, that on our YouTube channel, I've been doing a few of those artificial intelligence reviews. I asked the AI chatbot to write a review and a bio of Dark Side of the Moon, so I'll get that uploaded here very soon. It was very interesting to hear that kind of a really non-committal take on it, the very sterile AI take on this. But we'll get into that. And they didn't get a few things right on there as well. There's a few references to Barrett actually collaborating with them on Dark Side of the Moon, and I don't believe that was the case. I think that they paid homage to him a couple times throughout, and to what happened with Barrett and his leaving of the band.
Yes, they did.
But I don't believe he was physically involved in any of the productions. He may have hung out a little bit.
Maybe, but to me, I don't, because when they were doing Wish You Were Here, of course, Wish You Were Here was 3 years later, and obviously that was the one where he popped in, and they didn't know who he was anymore.
Yes. Yep.
I never heard that about Dark Side, but they did specifically, there was about mental illness. And, Us and no, what? It was second side.
Yep.
But
now, the other cool thing that I had read about this, that the voices that permeate throughout, we started off by saying there is no dark side of the moon, really.
yeah.
That is a piece of recorded audio from the doorman who worked at Abbey Road Studios. So part of this is that Roger Waters and Gilmore and the production crew did little mini interviews with people that were around the studio or other folks that they had invited in, either working at the studio or parts of their crew or other crew, and asked them a series of questions. What's your favorite color?
Yeah.
But then they'd get a little more, they'd delve into it, asking thoughts on violence, political corruption, mental illness, and they wove these sound clips throughout. And you mentioned that it is a headphone album. It is truly a headphone album. Some of these can't be picked up, especially if there's a little wear and tear on your vinyl. But in headphones with a great copy, you can hear these voices weaving seamlessly throughout the record.
When they were putting that together, it was Gilmore and Wright really wanted to take those voices and put them way down into the mix. They thought they were too loud. But Nick Mason and Waters, who really had been doing all the experimenting with all the sounds, they says, no, we need to bring this up. We want people to hear this. And of course, they went out in the end, and it really did. I mean, it kind of put the songs together. It's just that segue from song to song. That was so perfect.
And it's just odd that the variance of the voices through there. I did read also that one set of the voices that were recorded were Paul and Linda McCartney. And they ended up not using their sound clip. And I think it was because they said that they didn't feel Paul and Linda were taking it as seriously as they needed it to be taken.
Yes, you're right. Because they're trying to make a serious statement here. And they were just screwing around with them. That darn Paul McCartney.
Well, you hang around Abbey Studios, that's what
Abbey
Road.
They should have brought in John Lennon. He was more serious, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, no, I watched I watched that documentary.
Oh, so much for that.
All 35 hours of it or whatever
that's
that case.
True. Yeah, he did screw around a lot.
So the impacts of this album, though, too, I mean, reverberated through, not just when it was released. It was very, very well received by both critics and by fans. They just ate it right up. It became instantly a classic, I would say.
Yeah, no, you're right. Everyone wanted it, and word of mouth kept going. And they did make a single. They put a single out on it, but this was just FM radio, of course, was exploding at this time, and what better thing at night for FM radio than to put on A Side of Dark Side of the Moon? I mean,
truly, because of the movement to FM radio to be more AOR, more album-oriented rock, where they could play these lengthier cuts. They could work with the albums. Speaking as a former radio DJ, this was one of those that you could really get lost into, but if to hold into a format, it became very difficult because all of the songs are interwoven with each other, so you had to do a little crossfade action to make it work right. Otherwise, you're just kind of cutting something off that didn't need to be cut. But yeah, I mean, it was truly made for that revolution, moving to FM radio and stereo, especially stereo, in the early 70s.
And you could play a whole side, and you can go out and get a snack, get the restroom, come back.
On the radio, later. We called those constitutional songs.
Oh, okay.
So the other ones being Traffic's Low Spark a High Heel Boys or In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. So I'll be back in about 8 to 12 minutes.
Proper smoke.
Side note to this, I was in college in the mid-'80s, and I was there as technologies and radio were changing again. As the switch to digital was happening in the mid-'80s, compact discs were just at the very, very advent of this, and we worked hard. The radio station that I was at played vinyl. I spun records on a radio station in Marquette at Northern Michigan University, but we were also one of the first stations in the Upper Peninsula to have a compact disc player. We fought long and hard to get that into the studio. Can you guess what the first compact disc that we played on the air was?
Dark Side.
It was Dark Side of the Moon.
That's neat.
Had to have been, I'm thinking it had to have been about 87, 88, somewhere around in there. But
and that was the first time they heard Dark Side of the Moon in the Upper Peninsula?
No. We had the vinyl, and we played that constantly. But
okay.
we did kind of a big deal and say it's going to be uninterrupted. Little did we know that compact disc would do what it did to vinyl.
Yes.
Darn them.
Yep.
But still, to this day, this is an album. I said earlier, it's not my favorite, but this is a go-to. This is always a go-to, especially when you've got a couple of different versions of it. You got your play copy, you got your remix copy, you got your MoFi copy.
Yeah.
But I think I stunned you earlier. You alluded to the stack of Dark Sides that I've got sitting here on our table.
Yeah, he has a stack here, folks. There's so many types of Dark Side of the Moon, but how can you go wrong, if you do something with it, because everybody loves it? Well,
exactly.
There's a couple people that don't.
You say stack, you make it sound like a huge pile, but I do have a MoFi. I've got the remix here for the store. I've got my original with the posters, but
it's 3 feet high. I'm telling you, everyone. No, if you could only see it.
But you didn't catch the bootlegs, and we want to talk. I want to talk a little bit more about the bootleg. I've got one here. It's called The Dark Side over London, which was a concert bootlegged in October of '94. So this is a Post Waters. Is that Post Waters in '94 at that point?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. It was.
Yep.
Dark Side over London. But the ones, and you did show this on your YouTube channel.
Yes.
Just today, actually, with the Dark Side of the Moon from Wembley of 1974, November 17th.
The sound on that is pristine.
It is.
Oh, my goodness.
I had another one, and this one says, I think you had this one at one point.
I think I still have the vinyl.
And this is Dark Side at Wembley, but it's dated November 16th. So I've got to do some digging to see if it's incorrect or if it was actually a couple nights that were recorded 2 different shows.
Well, we bought the same albums 2 times because they changed the cover.
Who would ever do that?
Yes.
This Wembley concert, though, that was bootlegged is going to be, I think, one of the hotter ones coming out of the Pink Floyd anniversary release coming up here in just a couple of weeks.
That makes sense.
The Dark Side of the Moon 50th anniversary box set was announced a couple of weeks back. I'm not too happy about the structure of the box set itself because I think it repeats a lot of Dark Side and doesn't give us really anything new and exciting to go with it, except for the Wembley concert as an addition.
When you think, a group like Pink Floyd, how much is left out there for them to put in? Because when CDs came out, we began to add more and more stuff in there. And every 10 years, we celebrate it. Now we have this. The well has to go dry until someone goes, well, underneath my bed, I just happened to find this tape. It's incredible.
I think that the box set that they're releasing, the release date on this, by the way, is March 24th, coming up here in just a couple of weeks. But it does contain the remix version of the album, but then it has multiple digital variations of this, compact disc versions. It's got a Blu-ray audio version with surround sound, stereo mix, surround mix, DTS mix, Blu-ray audio 2, Atmos mix, DVD audio of all of the same things as well. So you really got to be a Pink Floyd completist to get the most out of this set. But the thing that I am most excited about, as we mentioned, is that the Wembley concert from '74, where Dark Side is performed in its entirety, is finally getting an official release.
Yeah, that is
part
nice.
Of this.
But there is do you get us marbles? In the last box set, you got 3 marbles. Remember those in the Dark Side? Yeah, they had this Dark Side of the Moon box set, and you got 3 marbles. For whatever reason, they thought, let's give them some marbles. Maybe you lost your marbles.
There we go. Well, it referred to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the addition, and what's even better is they're breaking out the Wembley vinyl as a separate release on its own. So the Dark Side of the Moon, live at Wembley Empire Pool, 1974, is coming out on the same day, March 24th, listing for about $38, and it is a double LP that has the entirety of the Dark Side of the Moon performance from that concert.
That's good, because if you haven't heard that, obviously we have heard this, but it is so good. And of course, they've been performing this for so long. So it was down pat. Everything was in sync and it just flowed. It wasn't like, when you hear the early bootlegs of it, sometimes some of the sound isn't right. It isn't as good or something goes wrong. And I've had a number of those bootlegs, but this one, and if they're going to do an official release, it's got to be great.
Well, you're right, though. For the bootleg to sound as good as it does, and they're going to be working from the better tapes of that. I'm really looking forward to that one.
So now I'm going to have another Wembley?
You're going to have another Wembley. We'll have to see what happens. So, and you know what? I don't even really have time to get into the whole reggae version of Dark Side of the Moon that we got sitting here.
Yeah, I tell you, he does. He has a dub, Dark Side of the Moon, and it is awesome. They add that bass and that ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk to it. It's incredibly good.
And you want to borrow this one?
Yes, the Flaming Lips, Dark Side of the Moon, Flaming Lips.
Performed in its entirety with Henry Rollins on here as well. It defies explanation at times, but it's still a very, very cool one. So, what do you think? Dark Side of the Moon, is that an album that folks should have?
Yes, you do. I've met a few people who do not like it. I mean, I don't like Pink Floyd, and that's fine. You know, there's some people that don't like Rush. It happens. But this, to me, if you were starting a record, if someone was to start a record collection, or 10 albums I should have, Dark Side of the Moon would be on it. I would always put that on there.
I will absolutely agree with you on that.
Along with the Sex Pistols, but the Dark Side of the Moon would be there.
Well, Steve, thank you very much. I hope you folks enjoyed our second episode of Two Guys Talking About Records.
I know I enjoyed it.
Pretty much what we do.
Yes.
Feel free to leave us a comment on either of our social media pages if you would like to hear us talk about a certain record at some point in time. I imagine we'll get to it. But Steve, what should we look for you on YouTube?
Yes, I check out Steve Carlson, Vinyl Community. Always have a show early on Sunday and on Thursday. I seem to be Thursday now. It seems to be a second.
Thursday is your midweek?
Yes.
All righty. And the early Sunday morning show with Kat, as always, is the fun one.
Gotta have Kat.
And then check out our channel at Radio Wasteland Records. Just do a search for that, or the at Radio Wasteland Records, if you will, on YouTube. We're still working on getting this podcast a little bit more reach, waiting to hear back from Spotify and Apple. That could take a little while, but in the meantime, you can enjoy it here. And we are putting these up a week later on the YouTube channel as well.
Fantastic.
Steve, thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, Jim.
Talk to you next week.
You bet.